In your book, The Faith, and I read it cover to cover and loved it, by the way.
Thank you.
2/3 of the way through, I forget where it is, you reflect on the Watergate experience. And you say, that moment when you stood in the dock and you heard it read, the United States of America versus Charles W. Colson. What was that moment like for you?
One of the most painful moments of my life, because I was a very patriotic young man growing up. I was went to college on an NROTC scholarship, and so I wasn't drafted. I enlisted, signed up for the Marine Corps. War was going on, half the lieutenants were coming back in pine boxes, but I wanted to go do my duty. I'd always felt that way. I gave up a very good law practice, very successful, to go in the White House, because I felt it was my duty. And to suddenly be told Charles Colson, the United States government against Charles Colson, was a shattering moment. I look back on it now, however, and I am grateful, because that was part of God convicting me of my own past and my own sins, and giving me a new life in Christ. So
how does this happen? I mean, you're chief counsel for President Nixon. Your office is right next to his. Mm-hmm. In the pecking order, I mean, you're one of the most powerful guys in the world.
Top half a dozen in the White House, right?
Yeah, yeah. How does it happen that a group of the most powerful men in the world can drift into this gray area?
Drift is a very good word, because nobody consciously starts out and says, I'm going to obstruct justice. It's crazy. No. And I was trained, and this is a good lesson for all of us, I was trained by a dad who was very puritanical. He was going to law school nights. I'd only see him on Sunday afternoons, but he would sit down with me and say, Chuck, never tell a lie. You won't get in trouble if you don't tell a lie. Always tell the truth. Do an honest day's work for an honest day's pay, and save money. I mean, I heard the Christian work ethic drilled into my head. My dad was not a believer, a Christian as I would now understand it. He was a cultural Christian. He lived on the heritage of the Christian teaching. But I went to the White House and left a law firm that was I was making a lot of money for those days in the late 60s. And I put everything in a blind trust, and I told my law partners, don't come see me in the White House, I'm not going to talk to you. I would get gifts at Christmas. I'd take them down to the switchboard operators or the driver of my limousine. I never thought I could be compromised. And that's when you're most vulnerable. Pride creates self-righteousness. And I discovered that human beings have the infinite capacity for self-rationalization. And the only way you can avoid that is accountability with other people. If you have a commitment to Christ in your life, it's going to help a lot, because it's going to keep you on your knees some days, and you don't think you're the one running the world after all. Or at least you're sobered enough to realize that. But the human tendency is, the harder you try to do everything right, the more likely you're going to do something wrong, because you're taking pride in it. I used to say nobody could ever compromise me. I went to jail. The lesson is that the human will is rebellious. The Apostle Paul laments in Romans 7, why is it that I know what is right and I do what is wrong? And that's the human dilemma. And he wrote that as a believer. We're all vulnerable. And only when you realize that, and only when you're dependent on others, and when you hold yourself accountable to someone who will hold you in account, are you going to be safe from that innate drift. You end up doing the wrong thing when you thought you were righteous about doing the right thing.
The culture of power. You know, a lot of things you can keep in the shadows because it's national security, right? You can live in the shadows and you can justify it. But at what point does the culture of power creep into your soul and begin to compromise, you know, who at your core you believe you really are?
The day you arrive in the White House, for example, and people start saluting you, and you're given a limousine, and all of a sudden you've got all this power. You think it's a perception of power, because you really don't have that much power. You think you do, and people are constantly saying, "Oh, what great responsibilities you have." And you're puffed up all the time. If I didn't go to parties, I didn't like the social circuit in Washington, never did. But once or twice or 3 times, 4 times I went for a particular reason. And you got ambassadors fawning all over you and the press clamoring around you. I can see how this could tip a person over the edge. It did me, in the sense that while I thought I was protected against it, I wasn't. Again, you need an accountability structure in your life.
You know the old adage, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Is that true?
Yes. Lord Acton was absolutely right. That was one of the great insights in human behavior. Power makes you think you can accomplish anything. And modesty and humility come when you know that you can't, that you're living on the heritage of those who have gone before you. That's really the essence of being a conservative. A conservative wants to preserve the moral order and believes he lives by the teaching of the past and by revealed truth, not by his own wits. That drives you to your knees, and a Christian has to believe that. A Christian has to be a conservative in his disposition on life because he's living by revealed truth.
Can a conservative be a Democrat?
Sure. Sure. Conservatism is a disposition.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about ideology now.
Right.
Left and right.
Yeah.
I kind of dispense with both because they're both ideological positions, the left and the right. But I do believe that a conservative temperament, a conservative disposition, the way conservatism has historically been understood, is very important for you to keep in perspective who you are and your relationship with God, which flows naturally as a Christian, and then a recognition of your own inadequacy.
You're an astute observer of the world and of the church at large, and the work that you established is all over the world. Marvelous work, working with prisoners. What has been the impact of what is being called postmodernism in terms of the church that we now deal with? You're speaking to Christians all of the time, and sort of central to postmodernism is there's no such thing as objective truth. Do you see the church eroded because of that, or do you see genuine faith still emerging?
No, I think one of the tragic trends in modern life is that the church has embraced the values of the culture. The values of the culture are 64% of Americans, for example, say there's no such thing as truth, absolute truth. 53% of evangelicals say the same thing. So that those of us who claim to be born again, serious Christians, taking our Bible seriously, reading it literally, believing that it instructs and informs our lives, can't possibly believe there's no such thing as truth when Jesus says, I am the truth. All ultimate reality is in the Logos. In the beginning was the Word with God. The Word was God. The Word, the Greek word that's used, that's translated as Word, is Logos, which means all reality, everything that can ever be known. How can you believe Jesus is who he says he is and live in the postmodern world? You can't. You've got to see that there's an absolute thesis and antithesis, and we can't cross that divide.
Is it you in one of your books? I think it is. Maybe it was Yancey. I'm not sure. But the point was, God goes where he's wanted. How wanted are those 53? How wanted is God by that 53% of evangelicals who aren't sure there's absolute truth?
I don't think they can be. I don't think he can be really wanted by them. They're paying respects to him. They go to church. They figure they're doing their religious duty. They look good in society. Nice thing to get dressed up on Sunday morning. That's not being a Christian. A Christian is, Bonhoeffer put it very well, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Great book out by my friend Eric in Texas.
I interviewed him on it. Yeah, it's a great book.
Eric started to work for me when he got out of Yale. He came to a meeting once and asked a great question. He's a fabulous guy, and that's a great book. Yeah. And people need to read it today because the cultural conditions in the West are not as different as we'd like to think from Germany in the 1930s. But Bonhoeffer said in a book he wrote called Cost of Discipleship, which I read when I was in prison, when Christ calls, he bids a man to come and die. Yeah. And unless you're prepared to die to yourself, you're going to have trouble calling yourself a Christian.